Like I mentioned, Jennifer is the founder. Thank you. So Jennifer is the founder of Susty Vibes, and she's a climate activist. She's a sustainability analyst, and her interest lies in different intersections of women, youth, and environment. And she recently launched the Eco-Anxiety Africa project, like I mentioned earlier, where we focus on understanding eco-anxiety and the experience of climate-related emotions in Africans. Dr. Charles, who is an assistant professor at the University of Nottingham, focuses on applied psychology, and his research investigates how social and psychological factors shape the way people engage with environmental problems. He also has interest in interrelationships between the environment, climate, and well-being. Like I mentioned earlier, this research was done in 5 Anglophone West African countries. And as you well know, Susty Vibes is based in Lagos. So we actually had to have partners from other countries we're having this research with to support us with insights and participants in this project. So we'd like to give a shout out to Ezekiel, who was our contact point for Liberia, and is a part of the Liberian Youth for Climate Actions. We also had Paul, from Green African Youth Organization in Ghana. We have Roslyn from Fridays for Future, Sierra Leone. And we also have Abduli from Clean Earth Gambia. So these people were very instrumental in the research project, and we would like to appreciate them. I would also like to introduce you to the research team here at Susty Vibes, who were in charge of interviews and other research breakdowns that we had to go through for this project. We have Hope, who was the team lead, or who is the team lead. We have Excel, we have Bolade, I myself and Noella were all researchers, and we supported in various capacities during this project. Right about now, we would have a poll where we would just like to understand the demography of you, our participants that have joined this project today. So if you can see the poll, I would like you to drop a yes in the comment section so I know we can all see the poll. If you're having any technical difficulties in accessing the poll, kindly also share with us in the comments, and we'll have somebody help you. Peg. Okay, yes, Angelo can see the poll. Okay, Olufemi can't. Please do let me know if you can see it now. But it will pop up on your screen, just a survey of about 5 questions. And okay. All right. Okay, so can we relaunch the poll, please?
Can you try that from your end, Amide? I don't seem to have access here.
All right. Apologies for that. Maybe if you can make me a co-host, and I'll try to launch from my end, but I'm unable to do that now.
Done.
Okay. Okay, I have launched the poll now. Please let me know if you can see the poll on your screen. Yeah, okay, thank you, Dr. Charles. Thank you, Anna. So we have about 5 questions on the survey. So we'd just like to understand the demography of people who are joining this launch, and that is basically why we have the questions. So just a basic understanding of how you see climate change and mental health. If you are done with the survey, kindly drop a done in the comment section so I can also give you a shout out.
This one, now mannequin. Climate change, I feel the pain.
Thank you, Angelo.
So we can save our lives. Climate change, I feel the pain.
Yeah, thank you. I also like to see more done in the comment section. Thank you, Dr. Charles. Thank you, Chineye. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Ezekiel. Thank you, Femi. Thank you, Svetlana. We'll just give you about 2 minutes to enable everybody who is on the call to take the poll, and then we can go to the next session. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Abduli. If you're unable to find the poll, you can also comment in the chat so we can have somebody help you with the technicalities of it. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all for joining us today and also taking part, in our survey session. We really appreciate you. Thank you, Bolade. We have about 40 seconds left for the poll to go off. Thank you all. Thank you so much for taking part in this survey. Right about now, I'll pass on to my co-facilitator, Lekwa, and he'll take us through the remaining sessions. Thank you all for joining once again.
Thank you very much, Aramide. So, hi everyone. My name is Hope Lekwa, and I'm the team lead for this research. It was a very exciting research. But right about now, I just want to introduce Dr. Charles to give an important speech or just a keynote talk on why this research is very important.
Thanks very much, Lekwa. I'm just going to jump into this and I'll try not to take up too much time so we can get into the exciting stuff. It was it was a fantastic opportunity to be able to work together with Sustivibes and our partners across West Africa on this project. So basically, what I'm going to do in this talk is just very briefly talk about the background a little bit and emphasize some of the main motivations for conducting the research. So essentially, I mean, everyone on the call will be aware of this already. Africa in general is considered to be sort of on the front line of climate change. So, the impacts of climate change are not abstract in any sense at all. They're very clear. So we've seen impacts in terms of increase in extreme weather events. We're seeing floods. We're seeing heat-related impacts. We're seeing massive impacts on the agricultural sector, so loss of harvests and the knock-on effects on food security and all that. That's just the evidence is yeah, there's loads of it. And basically, what this research, the significance of this particular project is kind of hopefully being a part of and stimulating a bit of a change in direction in the research around climate change to date, to bring it up to sort of the current situation that we have in Africa. There are two main issues that I want to mention very briefly. So The first issue is, even though there's been a lot of research around issues that are related, they're relevant to climate change, so things like disaster risk responses, things like work around in the agricultural sector, work around community development and development in general, and things like that. They haven't always been very explicitly linked to the broader problem of climate change. And the second factor with this is that a lot of that research has been led by, has been initiated by, has been self-conceived by people outside of Africa. So it's kind of like, researchers from outside of Africa kind of studying Africa. And that's one of the issues that this project tries to respond to. And then the second issue is that historically, Africa has always been largely sort of agrarian. So most of our communities have been rural and they've been very sort of agricultural focused. And so a lot of the climate change research has been really focused on impact in the agricultural sector. Now, obviously, that makes a lot of sense because, we need our agricultural sector to thrive in order to be able to get food and to live basically, and because agriculture has also been a very big part of the economic sort of the economic security of a lot of countries in Africa. But what's changed more recently is that Africa is urbanizing really rapidly. So in 2015, 50% of Africans lived in an urban area. Projections are that by 2050, there'll be nearly another billion people that live in urban areas. So another 950 million people or something that live in urban areas in Africa. So obviously the demographics are changing and we need to adjust the research focus to match that. So urban environments have their own unique set of problems, their own unique experiences of climate change. And what we're trying to do in this research is to reorientate focus onto those environments specifically. And it's also really important to mention that West Africa, the West African coast in particular, is a hotspot for urbanization. It's urbanizing much more rapidly than other parts of the region. So that's part of the reason why we chose to focus on this particular area and also to look at this particular cities that we've looked at. And then finally, the sort of psychological aspect of climate change hasn't always been a key part of the research in Africa. So when people think about what the experience in Africa might be, I think there's a lot of emphasis on just helping people survive, just making sure people live, addressing the worst impacts, mortality and things like crop failures, all that sort of impact that I've mentioned before. But what our project here is trying to do is also inspire a bit more ambitious thinking around this. It's very, it's very possible for people to be alive without having any quality of life whatsoever. And so that's not really, that doesn't seem like a sufficient goal to be aspiring for. So what we're trying to demonstrate here and what we're trying to kind of inspire us to reach for is trying to find solutions that not only help people in Africa survive, but also to thrive in the midst of this crisis, to thrive in the face of climate change. And so that's why we're focusing particularly on mental health, because this is a really key part of people's well-being. It's a really key part of people's overall, our ability to function, our ability to even be creative, to be able to, kind of move forward, to be resilient in the face of the impacts that we're facing and the adversities on the day-to-day. That's a really core component. And it's very easy to overlook that. And so we're trying to center that with this research. And it's been really exciting to see what has come out of that, looking across these 5 different countries. So thank you so much. Really grateful to Susty Vibes, really grateful to all our partners for the opportunity to be able to do this. Lekwa and his team, absolutely marvelous through the whole process. It's been a real joy to work with you guys. And I'll hand over to you now so you can share the findings from the research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles. And so now I'll just be taking us through the research methodologies as to how we truly did this research. And so firstly, as Amir already rightly said, in the beginning of this research, we had to partner with some of our research partners in the 5 West African regions, which were in Banjul, in Accra, also in Ghana, in Freetown, in Sierra Leone, and also in Monrovia. And these partners assisted us in recruiting some residents in their key cities, which were what was already talked about earlier in the slide. And we had about 10 diverse participants from the regions, and we had in-depth interviews with them, trying to understand what kind of environmental issues they were frequently accustomed to, what kind of mental health impact they had already witnessed from whatsoever impact they must have witnessed. And then we specifically had an age range of 18 to 52 all through the process of the research. And the research was particularly to explore their experiences, respectively, of course, as to how they had already witnessed or they had lived through many of these challenges in their respective countries and how they were also coping with these challenges too. And then once we got the data from them, we transcribed them, and of course we anonymized them just for ethics sake. And then it was all of this was just guided by the Regional Ethics Committee in the University of Nottingham, School of Psychology in the University of Nottingham. And afterwards, we analyzed and we presented a report for each city, of which we sent each report to the partners in the different cities for them to review and also for them to add whatever they think might have been missing in their own different report in each city. And the whole essence of this particular project was just so it wasn't the researcher alone that played a part in this. We wanted also the partners in the countries to play a role in this, making it more holistic and more inclusive, really. And so now I'm going to take us through the findings. So this is a high level finding of what we discovered in the five cities: Lagos, Accra, Banjul, Freetown, Monrovia. And most of the issues that kept arising were flooding, were sea encroachment, heat waves. Rapid urbanization also came up in many of these locations, and many participants talked about it being a headache for them. The noise, the heat, the dirt, the pollution that comes from that kind of lifestyle. And also another interesting factor that came up as something that exacerbated mental health in these people was the reduced responses from government to environmental disasters that happen in their different locations. Many of them talked about the government not doing enough. Many of them talked about the government not even doing anything. And not just the government they highlighted, they also highlighted their local governments, their in some country, in some regions, they talked about their mayors and all that. And of course, a very important exacerbating factor that we talked about was unemployment. And we reckon that when climate change happens, it's difficult to even adapt or even to be resilient when you don't even have a means to even feed yourselves. And so many people talked about, or rather, there was a substantial amount of people that talked about unemployment as something that exacerbated their mental health during the climate crisis. And so these were some of the participants' responses here. And these names are just pseudonyms, but the responses, of course, are the actual responses of the participants. With regards to flooding, a participant in Accra said, for Accra, our major problem is flooding, and I strongly believe that it is due to the changes in the weather. You will see places that never had flooding issues getting flooded every time. And this just goes back to when we said that some people just really are being impacted by this climate change in several ways, one of which is also flooding. Then with regards to the mental health, a participant said, when I go to the beach and I see that there's a rise in sea level and waste pollution, I'm unable to relax. And the beach, according to this person, is some place that they go to. So we even now see that even a place that is meant for solace and relaxation now is also changing, and many people are not able to also find that relaxation that they want to get after facing the hustle and bustle in the city and just trying to relax. With regards to losses from the environmental changes, a participant said that they borrowed money for their business, and unfortunately, what actually happened here was flooding, and they said the flooding actually destroyed their business, and now they are looking for, according to this person, they are looking for another means to start the business all over again. So we see how apart from climate change, apart from the impact of climate change being the flooding, it also goes beyond to even affect people's livelihood and how they actually even just live, really. And so some of the predominant themes that were identified as mental health impact from climate change in these cities uh, were the increased anxiety. And many participants talked about anxiety. They were uncertain about the future. I remember a participant talking about a June 3rd situation that happened in Accra, I believe, saying that the flooding was really terrible, and and that each time it rains, they are always worried about whether the same thing that happened in the situation that happened on the 3rd of June would happen again. I also recall another participant talking about that every time it rains, they always get to change their roof many times. And so every time it rains and they hear the thunder sounds and everything, they are always worried. A situation about mudslide happened, was narrated to us in Monrovia when each time the rain falls, because Monrovia and Freetown, those locations are some locations rather are really conditioned by the environment in the sense that they are living mostly or rather many residents were living close to hills, and then when the rain falls, mudslide happens, and then it destroys their homes and their businesses. And so many participants talked about anxiety from this. Many also talk about emotional stress and trauma. I remember a participant talking about losing a relative because of flooding issue that happened I believe it was Sierra Leone, in Freetown. And they talked about that a particular case killing about 16 people. And then unfortunately, part of those deceased was her relative. And then she actually narrated that actually happened recently. And she was told this news on the morning that we were having this interview. So it was a very emotional time, even for the participant recalling these memories back for us, and also for us listening to these experiences. And many of course talked about the stress and the worry. I remember a participant from Lagos talking about the sun, and she just never wants to go out again just because of how terrible the sun is nowadays. And even when she does go out, she doesn't want to spend much time outside. I also remember a participant talking about her job, because of her job needed her to stay out to go out and market things to people. She did not want to do that job again just because of how terrible the sun was. And so now in that particular case, we then see how we then see how climate change impacts even the ability to even stay in a job really. And somebody also talked about traumatic experiences. This person narrated an experience for us where she was actually in the flood, and it was a terrible experience for her. She recounted that she doesn't even like to recall these memories because it's very triggering for her. And with regards to anger, a very interesting experience was that when many times when these impacts happen, nobody or the government doesn't respond as they should. And when they know that money is being set aside for X, Y, and Z, and it is not being done, they are aware of the lapses of the government and also of the lapses of responsible offices. But then again, nothing is done. And so this kind of like builds pent-up anger within them. And so I'm just going to take us through some of the responses that some of them gave with regards to mental health impacts. Some of them said, with regards to worry, a participant said, it's actually stressful because when you wake up in the morning, when you wake up and your whole house is submerged, nowhere else to go, it makes me feel defeated to a certain point. Now that we are talking about it, it brings back so many memories and so much work, so many stress and so much work. With regards to death and trauma, a participant said, and you look at the main town, there's mass flooding that was reported recently, and about 16 people who were reported dead. And I even lost one of my relatives this morning. So this was the participant I talked about, recalling that incident that happened to her recently, and she just narrated the experience for us, telling us that it was very traumatizing for her, even just recalling the memory again. With regards to trauma, a participant said, discussing these experiences bring back memories of difficult times, and I'm unhappy when I think about them. And I think it's very important to also mention that when we were having the discussions with them, we tried also to understand their level of understanding with regards to the term climate change and also how they're able to conceptualize climate change. And yes, many of them had a foundational understanding of what climate change is, but at the same time, uh, but at the same time, their knowledge wasn't enough, really. And so many of them told me that even after this research, even after this interview, they are going to learn more about this because they actually want to know why this is actually happening. I remember a participant, she actually stayed back after our interview just for me to explain some of the things about climate change to her and why it's happening and what she can do about it. And so we see that there's an interest in climate change, but at the same time, there wasn't a lot of interest in inquiring about how I can manage my mental health. And so we see that there's also a gap in people actually understanding that, okay, there's X, Y, and Z ways to manage your mental health. You have to do this, you have to prioritize yourself and all that. So the part of the findings in this was that though that there were a lot of inquiries about climate change, about why it's happening this way and what can I do to stop it from happening, there was very little with regards to mental health and how to respond properly to mental health. Many of them gave, of course, their ways of responding to mental health, of which I'm going to go into very soon. But at the same time, they didn't talk about any mental health supports in their locations. Whatever the government or whatever what organization was doing with regards to mental health support in amidst climate crisis. And so these were some of the predominant themes that were identified as the coping mechanisms for mental health, for the mental health impact that they face, really. And I think before I go into this, I think it's also important to state that it was very clear to us researchers whilst we were analyzing this the interviews that the impact of climate change also affect developmental stages in every person's life. Uh, a very key case was a student. Actually, she told us a story that she wasn't able to go to school because of the flooding that happened, and then she missed her exams. And then her friends who were able to relocate to another side, to another location and school, did that, and then she was just left alone. So in that story alone, we see some kind of uh, you know, her being affected, or rather her education being affected by climate change, and also the fact that she has almost lost a friend, she has almost like lost the presence of a friend just because of her friend had to move to another location just because of the flooding. And so part of the coping mechanism that they gave was community action. I remember a businessman in Freetown and Banjul talked about they taking on the mantle to host or to carry out volunteer work in the communities. One of them recounted that whenever it's time for whenever the flood happens, they go out into the rain and then they go into locations that are pretty much vulnerable to this impact, and then they go and start helping people out, whether it's by bringing them to safer locations or just trying to save whatever might have been washed away by climate change. And of course, a participant, sorry, many participants also talked about learning. They cited learning as some experience or some way that they used to cope with climate change. There's a saying that once you're able to understand your fear, it's almost no longer a fear for you. And many of them, were said that they were going to resolve to learning about climate change, why it is happening this way, and what they can do about it. And of which also piggybacks on the first point of community action. And many of them have also talked about social support. And, they cited the help of, they cited the importance of family and of friends in this impact. Many times, whenever they must have been impacted by climate change, because of they had no, mental health, uh, clinical mental health support, they resolved to, getting the support from their family. And thankfully, their family was there for them. a participant said the participant that lost her relative, she narrated that she had the relative she lost was I think her sister's husband, and she recounted that this husband was very very important to her as when she was schooling. She, the man was very supportive in education, and then when he left and when he died, due to the flooding, she got support from friends. The closure she got from her family was so helpful that she had to narrate that as part of her coping mechanisms. And of course, many of them talked about friends. They also talked about the power of speaking about your trauma, of speaking about what actually causes you mental stress. And they talked about the one participant I recall talked about even the mere fact of just speaking out your problems is helpful for them in managing their stress, really. And also many of them talked about faith and spirituality as a way to help them cope amidst this crisis, amidst this impact that actually affected them. Seeing that, if they don't get the help of the government or of their family, many people here in Africa or in this research resorted to faith and spirituality as their ways of coping. They prayed, they sang worships and all that. And with creative expressions, many of them talked about journaling, many talked about hiking, many talked about singing also. And this is a very interesting ways of dealing with of dealing with mental health impact from climate change or any impact at all, because it gives them the ability to actually just speak out to speak out their stresses in creative ways, really. And that was what most of the participants did. And of course, another way of coping that many participants did was repair and relocation. I recall a participant saying that they constantly had to, even though it might not be long-term coping, but they constantly had to change their roof every time that rain fell, or that they constantly had to look for places to live or to relocate to every time that the flooding situation happened. And so these were some of the responses from the residents with regards to how they coped. This participant, I remember said, this participant, Mrs. Bumi, she said that, I remember she talked about losing her piggery business, losing about 5 million naira in piggery. This was in 2020, and then she lost everything due to flood. And then when I asked her about how she was coping with this, and she said, you being anxious about it does you nothing. And then she says that she usually just prays about it, and then she just plans and re-strategize and know what next to do. Another participant said, I'm always happy on ground helping people so I can manage it. And when I'm around with them, I think it helps you. So, talking about himself, he says when he's around helping people, it also helps him in turn to deal with whatever stress, whatever kind of worry that he's also dealing with. And so, he made a very powerful statement saying that he's not only just sympathizing with them, but also his hands are also on ground, really. And with regards to creative expressions, a participant in Monrovia said that he was working on a poetry album this year to wake people up with regards to the awareness of human actions and climate change and how to mitigate and adapt to these changes. And that was his plan, to make people proactive in nature and be reactive also. And so these were some of the these were just some of the insights and findings that we got from the countries. And of course, later on in the year, next year rather, we'll publish a report. But just for now, if you do have any questions with regards to any process in this research, you can ask them now. I'm gonna give about, okay, someone wants to speak.
Yes. Hi, this is Angelou Ezilo. I was curious as to how large your the groups were that you surveyed. in the different 5 cities that you've mentioned? And
Okay.
what's the age span of those groups? What's their demographic?
All right. Thank you for that question. So our age bracket was between 18 to 52 years old. So we had a lot of perspective from young people and also from elderly people with regards to how they were living in this reality of climate change and mental health issues, really. And the demographic with regards to the number of people we interviewed we interviewed about 10 people in each cities. And so in total we had about 50 interviews. So 10 interviews with residents in 5 cities, making everything 50 interviews in total. And okay, I see Dr. Charles's question here. So I'm just going to read it out. Or rather, Jennifer's question first. Well, Jennifer has the comment. She says, "I find these last two very insightful. Always good to find socioeconomic problems showing up in climate change, in climate change discourse, in essence to climate change, and climate change is everything, just rightly so." And with regards to Dr. Charles's question, he said, "I wonder how changes to social networks and connections by intra-regional migration impacts the social coping mechanisms who people can recall on for help when they move to different locations." And yeah, this was part of my inquiry with the lady that talked about. There's really no way I can't give you a definite answer, but this was something that I inquired about with the lady that said her schoolmate had to relocate to different locations just because of climate change. And also, with people that talked about climate change, the flooding, causing them to relocate almost every 2 years, every year because of their location. Um, it's almost like them starting a new life, and doing that, many times over and over again. It can be it can have an effect on relationship, really, and that is also a very interesting way to or perspective to look from when talking about how people adapt to these changes.
Thanks very much, Lekwa. Yeah, sorry, I was just, the thought just came to mind as you were speaking. I was thinking this is something that's worth thinking about as well. You're right that when people move around, they lose their networks, they lose the people they're already familiar with, all that kind of thing. What happens then? And also, I was thinking it links to, when you were mentioning people don't ever really talk about what to do in response to their mental health, prior to actually asking them. I think the staff focus on the structural issue and it's like, okay, flood has happened, I need to rebuild my house and I need to, all that kind of stuff. But I guess from the wider work that you're doing at Sustainable Vibes, do you feel like people also recognize the value of just, psychological level interventions of almost like just kind of looking after yourself first before you start thinking about finding solutions? If you're not in a good space mentally, if you're not in a good state mentally, you might even find it difficult to identify what's an actual solution, what's actually a good choice to make, that kind of thing. Is that something that you've sort of, yeah, do people kind of see the value of that, of just addressing that psychological issue first before we
Do
start thinking
people
about
what?
the people, people you've engaged with in your wider work around sustainable vibes, do they, when talking about climate change and mental health, how much appreciation do you think there is for the idea of let's just deal with the psychological issue first? Let's just make sure we're actually in a good place mentally before we start then pursuing structural, kind of solutions.
Yeah, with regards to the people I've spoken with in this research and also outside of this research, I know for sure that and I mean, you can comment anytime if you want to. I know for sure that usually when an impact strikes, many people don't take into cognizance their mental well-being first. They literally just want to yank themselves out of that situation into something at least, you know, manageable, and then they can now start processing their losses or their impacts, really. So, pretty much the impact, or rather the concern about mental well-being comes in almost secondary, but not, I wouldn't say last really, but it comes in almost secondary. And that's something that we would like to also mention with this project, this research project. Jennifer, I see your hand. Dr. Charles, is that all right? Okay, Jennifer, I can see your hands up.
Sure, Lekwa, and thank you so much for taking us through the insight from the report. So, Dr. Charles, to your question, I think just as Lekwa mentioned, we're still at the stage where we are literally validating this impact for people. A lot of people have said to us, and by people I mean both practitioners and just regular residents have said, yes, there's a link, between these issues, but we've never really thought about it. We've not looked at it in this way. Teachers have talked about the mental health impact of the crisis, not just on themselves, but the work they do with, students and young people. But they say, it's somewhere at the back of our heads, but we don't think about the need to kind of take care of ourselves, how we're feeling, from a well-being perspective. It's always have been about safety, adaptation in the sense of let's even live, for another day. What can we do to prevent this from happening again, rather than how are we feeling from what we've just experienced. So it's been a lot of validating, even literally advocacy and saying to people, well, this is something we need to look at, especially if we think about agency, if we think about climate adaptation from community-led perspectives, then people should know the different sort of range of impacts, the way the crisis is impacting them from both a psychological or a socioeconomic point of view. So definitely just validating at this point. So there's a lot more work to do, and research like this, shows us that we're walking a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. With regards to your question, Olufemi Aditunji, he's asking about whether the environment contributed to the responses on their mental health. And yes, it did. For example, in Lagos, we saw responses about responses on flooding, rather, also responses about on heat waves too. And in locations like Monrovia, Freetown, what was talked about there was mudslides, was also flooding too, and also a bit of pollution with regards to industrial pollution and the rest of that. And in Banjul, in Monrovia and Banjul, what was also highlighted really was the encroachment, was coastal encroachment and sea level rises, or sea level rise in their different locations, with in additions to mudslides, heavy rainfall and storms and all that. Angelo has a question. She says, will this collaboration be going on? Collective action is so key to taking bigger. So yeah, I can't really answer that, Dr. Charles. Do you want to take on that?
Absolutely, yes. No, I think this is more of a taster of a pilot for more work. So part of the and purpose of the funding that supported the work was also not just about conducting research, but also sort of enabling new networks. So obviously through this project, I mean, I've always been involved with Susty Vibes. I'm not, I'm not letting them go anywhere. But we also have partners across West Africa as well, and the plan is to try to build on that and do more of this. I mean, as Jennifer said so eloquently about how we're still at the stage of validating people's experiences, and then there's still a lot of work to do then with, okay, one of the coping mechanisms, people want to learn about climate change. And as Lekwa was speaking, I was thinking, well, what then happens when they learn about climate change? What are the implications when people get better understanding of, for example, the injustices associated with the cause of climate change? What's that going to bring into the, how's that going to change the narrative, the discourse? When people learn also about things like, what's happened with all this other countries around the world, not really getting their act together, not really making the necessary investments and necessary commitments to actually limiting the impacts that are coming. So it's not just about the cause, but also the impacts could have been maybe a bit not as bad as they now will be because of all this years of dallying. What happens with that? How does that affect people's sense of agency? How does that affect the way people feel about the issue? So there's a lot to cover still. I think this is really only just the beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. And the reason why the reason why I asked that, and I'm happy to hear that this is a pilot and you're looking to do more, because as you started off rightfully saying, usually research is by researchers outside of Africa about Africa. So I'm really happy to hear that this initiative is starting to happen with cities representative of the continent, and because I believe that the challenges and the impacts are different, and we talked about Africa being on the front lines of climate change and eco anxiety and all these other things. So I just really would love to hear that this is ongoing. But thank you so much for your work, and Safety Vibes as always.
Thank you very much, Anjulu. Aimide, I see your hands are up. I'm sorry, guys, we have just to take one question left. So, Aimide, do you have any question?
Yeah, I'm just building on, Olufemi's question. I just wanted to say location plays a factor in how people realize the impact of, climate change to their mental health. For example, when we're speaking to people in Lagos, for instance, who were not really directly impacted, or had secondary impacts. Maybe their estate was flooded, or the estate at the back of their house was flooded, but it did not get to them. They had this bury my head in the sand kind of, it is not yet my problem. But for people who were at the front lines, were living in coastal communities, they had no option but to, talk about the impacts of whatever they experience, whether it be mudslide or flooding, on their psychological well-being, because they understood, they started becoming angry, they were changing, they noticed changes in people around them. So I think, so in that aspect, the location definitely plays an impact to how people perceive, or how people want to perceive, climate change of their mental health. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Aimide. And finally, we are done with the launch. And firstly, lastly, we'd like to just thank you all for honoring our invitation and being present here at this launch. We reckon that this launch is very important for the work of climate change, but most importantly for the work of climate change and mental health in Africa, really, because we get that there is a lot of work done in this space, and with your support, and also a big thank you to our partners in the different region, in the different locations that we had the interviews. They were able to support us and provide us with the participant that we interviewed that gave us this insight, and we just want to extend our appreciation to them also. We would like to say that the next step with regards to this project would be to have a concise report or reporting about all of these findings, and of course, like Jennifer said, hopefully we'll delve even deeper into other African countries and of course Africa in general. So again, we'd just like to say a very big thank you to all who have taken out of the time to join us here, and we'll see you next year in our research when our research comes out. Take care, everybody.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye.